Good evening, friends. Shalom, shalom. Blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Un-Apologetics, the show where we are, of course, unapologetic about apologetics. And sorry about that. And I'm your host, CJ Cox. I want to apologize for being a little late here today. Debate ended up going pretty long. Actually, it was a very awesome debate. If you guys did not catch it, definitely go back and watch that when you have the time. And then I tried to get over here as quick as I could, but I really should have scheduled this more, I guess, towards like the 10:25 area anyways. I was told it would go about 3 hours, and so, it was sort of my fault for scheduling it a little bit too early. But nonetheless, we are here for the debate after show. I am, excuse me, sorry, I was just looking here in the chat a little bit, so I see Brother Nicholas is here, thank you. Stripper is here, thank you. Brother Jamie's here. Thank you as well. Honesty Angel. Shalom to all of you. Thank you guys for being here with us. I have sent out invitations to all of the participants. If I understand correctly, at least Jonathan Sheffield was planning on chiming in here, but I think Jim Majors actually might be too. I thought I heard somebody come in here a second ago, but I wasn't actually paying attention, honestly, so it might have actually had that happen. With that though, hang on just a second. I just got a message from John, actually. Sorry about that, friends. With that though, we are going to go ahead and jump into this. I do want to let you guys know, obviously, the room is open, so you can definitely jump in and participate, give your thoughts on the debate, give your thoughts on the subject matter, all of that sort of stuff. There is first priority for any of the debaters who participated. So, excuse me, if we see Jim, Jonathan, Dr. Boyce, or Dr. Josh in here, they will get, obviously, first priority. And I know we don't typically see the moderators, but if either Sam or James were to show up, they would also get first priority as well. But nonetheless, I want to go ahead and jump right into some of my comments. By the way, I see Slam here. Shalom. Want to go, like I said, jump right into some of my comments. I thought it was a very good conversation. I see we actually just got Jonathan here. So Shalom, thank you for being here with us. So I thought it was a really good conversation. I thought actually both sides involved definitely looked like they were bringing their A game, and I liked the fact that it was more structured too. I'm a big fan of the formal style of debate. So just in the style, just stylistically itself, that was definitely a cool thing. Not that I have any problem with the fast-paced modern day debate style. I just really like these sort of formal. We have the openers and we have rebuttals and we have cross-examinations and all that. I just think that it's really useful. It allows people to actually get more, fleshed out descriptions of each of the sides rather than turning into a blood sport. It actually turns into a pursuit for knowledge, I think. So I think that's a very cool thing. Also, I thought that the arguments presented were very good. I obviously do have my biases, so you guys can take all this with a grain of salt, but I thought that the side for prophecy did an absolutely excellent job. There were certain things that I thought were a little bit of mountain passables that almost never even got brought up after they were posited. Like, for example, it was mentioned that Ezekiel is a contemporary of Daniel who mentions him, and then it was almost never challenged because, in my opinion, maybe because it probably couldn't be challenged. Although I know some people try to go the Daniel route with that about the Ugarit character, but nonetheless, might have some thoughts about that later. Also, the fact that it was actually in not just that the book was preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but that it was preserved as coming from a prophet was never really properly addressed, in my opinion. It was addressed for sure, so it wasn't completely done away with, but it wasn't properly addressed, in my opinion. I didn't think that they did a good job of that because they referenced, other second century texts. And that actually, Jim Majors brought that up quite a bit. And that's true. There are other second century texts that we find preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but they're not preserved in such an authoritative manner, right? Being like on the same level as Deuteronomy, for example, as Daniel is. And in fact, we see the same thing a little bit later towards Josephus's time, right? He's not mixing, like, for example, the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jasher or something along those lines with Daniel, but he does count Daniel. In fact, even the famous Council of Jamnia, or however you end up pronouncing that, they're disputing, and they're not actually disputing whether or not it's canon. They're disputing a completely different pedantic matter. But nonetheless, they're disputing Ecclesiastes and Esther. What does that imply? That Daniel was already actually accepted in this particular pedantic manner, which, by the way, just to clarify, was whether or not it made the hands unclean. It wasn't whether or not it was canon, but whether or not it made the hands unclean. And the reason we know this is because the argument presented in favor of Ecclesiastes and Esther was all canon books make the hands unclean. Therefore, these books, which are obviously canon, would make the hands unclean. So just to briefly give you guys a little bit of information on that. And I thought that was an incredibly solid argument. I thought that it was solid to bring up a lot of the ancient sources, Josephus and in fact, Josephus being one of the biggest ones. But of course, some of the people who were against Josephus in the Book of Daniel, bringing up Jerome was very nice. I thought it kind of caught Jim off guard that Jerome was a Hebrew scholar, right? And I think that was kind of funny because in a way, I somewhat expect that, right? There's this idea that the church fathers were a bunch of ignorant and unlearned men, but that could not be farther from the truth, right? They actually were incredible. So I thought it was a great debate. I don't want to just completely rave on one side, even though I do believe the pro side won. I do think that Jim and Dr. Josh did a phenomenal job for their side. They presented some interesting questions, I think, that I would certainly not completely ignore. And I have respect for both of them. In fact, I not that I have any problems with Dr. Josh. That's not what I mean to say by this, but I quite like Jim. Me and Jim can kind of, so far in our conversation, seem to hit it off quite well. And I don't say that as anything against Dr. Josh by any stretch. It's just that I do quite like Jim. So don't want to, come across too biased, but nonetheless, those were my thoughts. Welcome, Jonathan. Nice to have you here today. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I'm glad you were able to tune in. What did you think about the PowerPoint slides? I know it was a little different this time than I did.
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch as much of that because I had to catch a lot of it on audio.
Can I send you the slides?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact,
how do I send it? Can I send it here or?
Well, you would probably want to send them as downloads, I would think, which would probably be in email format, but potentially it could happen on Twitter as well.
Let's see. Let me go in here because then you can bring, because it goes up a lot of points. And what I did with the PowerPoint slides, I wanted to provide more information. Let me go into the media.
Hey, out of curiosity, were you or Jim or Dr. Josh or anyone else? I thought I heard somebody pop in earlier before we actually went live, but I never actually communicated with that person, and then there was no person here, so I don't even know if that person was a person.
Let's see.
I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody or anything, because that would obviously not be fun.
No, I'm going to send it to you on Facebook in Messenger, because I don't think it'll allow me to. Where's CJ? Why will it not? Are you on? Oh, here we go, CJ. Let me do this. Yeah, I wanted to do something different to really just showcase a lot of the arguments on there. Obviously, I wanted to do a different treatment of Alexander that I feel like hasn't really given it the weight of the evidence that's really being said there by bringing out quotes from Arian and the other historians, even Hectepus of Adepo, which actually talks about the Exodus in his writings. So, let's see. I don't know if it'll allow me to. Can you send me the link to your email?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, just to remind everybody here, I don't know if we will end up getting either of the other three but they have been tagged. But just so you guys know, this is an open room, so if anybody does want to come in and give their comments or anything like that, that is something that is obviously okay. The link should be in the description. I'll go ahead and drop it in the live chat here as well. And then I'll send you my email right now here in the private chat.
Okay.
Of course, I guess, I don't know, maybe a bunch of people are over at the Amy Newman one. I'm not sure how large of a channel she has or not. Regardless, though, we are very appreciative of everybody who is here.
Let's see. Boom, boom. Yeah, let me get this.
But no, I thought it was definitely really good. I think that one of the big things that is kind of interesting about this conversation in particular is that it kind of, in my opinion, exposes a lot of the bias on the side of people who want to be like contrary to the Bible. Specifically, specifically the fact that like they want to push it back as far as they possibly can, right? Which is in a way almost unreasonable. And let me tell you why I think this is something that exposes the position, right? So we have fairly solid representation of not only the book of Daniel, but also commentaries on the book of Daniel, from anywhere from 125 to 100 BC, right? And it could even be potentially before then, by the way. It's not like a set in stone position by any stretch that these things are even that late, right? But nonetheless, and so they place this book literally as soon as they did the same thing with everything else, right? If we looked at, for example, the fact that we have a copy of the book of the Gaelic Wars, right, from 900 AD in a completely different language, right? We'll be like, okay, if we're doing the same thing, this is obviously something that is 850, maybe 800 AD, but we're not going to conclude that it was written by Julius Caesar, right? And yet we do, of course, because that's not the way that we do history. We don't just know the nearest possible date that we can get to this particular book's finding, right? That's the date we're going to attribute to the book's writing. That's not how we do these things, right? Rather, we understand we have early text, and this is something that goes back in a tradition to, in that particular case, Julius Caesar, and in this case, obviously, the book of Daniel. And I find that to be in some way kind of a, I don't know, like I said, it exposes the position in a little bit, but that's just my opinion, of course.
Yeah, I kind of brought up, are we applying a different double standard to the book of Daniel? How we kind of apply standard measures to antiquity or antiqual work. I mean, we know how we come to a dating of the Homeric texts that were produced in under Pisistratus, the Archon of Athens. So we date that with testimony. So if we tried linguistically, we'd probably get no further than the 2nd century BC when they were doing all that editing. But another 6th century work, we date it on much later testimony, but that they're not going to question Cicero or Pausanias or even Dionysius Strax. That's why I kind of brought up, but when it comes to a lot of the Jewish sources, Josephus, which is consistent with the historical period, that we're not going to listen to because, I mean, if we're evaluating the history, well, that's the history. Those are the reports that came out, and it fits the historical period. So I think the presentation went really well. I think the slides that I just sent you, CJ, they were really able to tell a big story on what happened because, we do have to explain history and Daniel's impact on history.
Real quick, I just want to acknowledge Kevin Chaos showing up. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
How's it going, Kevin?
I'm doing well.
Were you able to catch the debate?
I did not know. Something I'm going to have to look back at.
Yeah, if you're interested in textual criticism kind of things, it is definitely a good one. I honestly think it's one of the better debates that's been on modern day debate, at least recently for sure, because they had some pretty solid ones in the past, but it is a pretty good one.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I haven't been over there in a while, so I will check that out.
Do you have any, just out of curiosity, do you have any thoughts on the Book of Daniel's preservation in particular? Have you ever looked at anything into that?
I'm not familiar with the Book of Daniel as much. I did want to reference to Jonathan's comment. He was talking about like Homer. I don't know of anyone who would reference that as a historical text. I mean, that's obviously seen as mythology.
Yeah, but the similarity is it is a book published at a certain point in time, and even though they may look at some of the Old Testament as myth or heroic tales, the point I was bringing up the Homeric text is not to say that, I mean, what it meant to the Greek society was a piece of propaganda that they were using to, really, ingrain in Athenian culture. And in many same ways, the Jewish histories, their Old Testament, that was, what was guiding theirs. The similarities is it's a document published in 6th century BC. And so Daniel, at the end of the day, while we believe it's a book of prophecy, it's the word of God, it's also a book that was published by a certain person at a certain time. And the way we measure that, how we can come to a knowledge when a book came into life or into being into a society as big as the Jewish nation or the Homeric text, is through subsequent reports from the historians that we can corroborate testimony that allows us to trace the book back, because we need a person, we need a place and a time that it came into existence, because it is a physical object. It's being used in synagogues. So the same way that the Greeks, the Athenians were assimilating the Homeric poems into their society, the Jews were using their texts to assimilate into their society as well. They obviously had different views on what the Homeric texts were. Even though the genre may be a little different, it's still a text. And so how do we know that the text was written at a certain time? Regardless of its content, that procedure is the same.
Well, and I would kind of point out, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I hear there is maybe you're saying they are kind of inhibited or limited by their particular reference, their point in their point in time, right?
Yeah, so that, a book has to be created by someone physical, in the sense that, and it's read in synagogues, it's distributed throughout the Jewish nation. So those involve people, events, people who come in contact of a work have information on where the work comes from. And so what I was illustrating, at least in my slides on the show, that the only reason why we know that Pisistratus, who was the Archon of Athens in 6th century BC, is because we have reports from Cicero, we have reports from Dionysius Thrax, and we have reports from Pausanias. And a lot of weight are just on those two figures. But we do have a book coming down to us, so it had to come from somewhere. And the question is, does their histories fit the historical conditions? Because if it wasn't done in Athens, I don't know where else it would have done. Maybe Thebes with Pindar, but if it fits the historical time frame, for the publication, and we have reports or testimony from those that were educated in those societies that had information that has come down in their records that tell us where a text comes from.
Well, and really quick too, I do just want to point out just something about the Homeric texts. It's not necessarily accurate to say nobody looks at them as historical texts per se. Everybody looks at them as very clearly mythologized accounts. And there's certainly questions as to the historicity of Odysseus himself and that.
Yes.
Thing. But the Trojan War has been almost entirely accepted by scholars of Greece and Ionian history. And a lot of people even will go as far as to accept like the characters within it, like Agamemnon and Priam and Hector and even Achilles, I've heard could have potentially been a real general.
Because they did show up in the Masorite or the Hittite records. So those names did come out. They have a site to where possibly the event actually happened, which gave rise. But the compilation of the text happened at a definitive period that we can track to. So its relation to Daniel is the piece that, this is a major work that came into the Jewish nation that was spread across the synagogues, was in use by the priests. And so it doesn't magically just show up and people are just accepting of it and it comes in. And so that's where I wanted to frame how, when we measure history or works of publication, like we know when, right around the time when Josephus wrote, how do we know that? Well, we have reports from people at that time that give us that testimony, or the testimony that comes a couple hundred years later. Yeah, I'm quoting this work from Josephus. This is his work. And we see that testimony corroborated over different places. So it did spend a lot of, I did spend some time. I think you were right, CJ. The Ezekiel piece that we brought up was to factor in on the fact that we have a person that is being described by Ezekiel, a prophet, that is speaking of someone well known by that time that he's equating with two other great men prophets in the Bible, and that description would fit the person identified in the book of Daniel. So we have someone that we know. So what I wanted to contrast that with is the fact that in the 2nd century, we don't have that. But that's the basis of their whole hypothesis. I mean, who fits the description of someone that was able to get it in during the war with the Syrians? I mean, who even had time to do something like that? Given the time that the Secludians were invading, they're integrating a new text in their temple that they even have possession of. Oh, CJ, you still there?
Sorry, I was away for a second. If you're,
sorry, no. Yeah, I was on a mute there. Sorry. I just saw somebody just jumped in too, but then immediately left. I'm not sure who that was, but nonetheless, one of the things I thought was kind of interesting too, or is kind of interesting. He did mention the Daniel thing from the Ugaritic 14th century text, and there is he didn't actually Jim is the one who brought this up, by the way, and he didn't actually bring this up in regards to Ezekiel, but that is usually where I see people bring up Daniel as potentially a source for Daniel, and being some sort of I guess well, not ancestor, but whatever the opposite of ancestor is, right? Descendant of this Daniel character in a sort of textual way. But the thing is that obviously doesn't work for a lot of different reasons. Number one, the Hebrews are not Ugaritic. They don't speak Ugaritic. They don't have any cultural relation to the Ugarites or the Uyghurs, or however you even say that. I'm not sure who exactly speaks the Ugaritic language, but I know that it's not the Northwestern Semites is the point, right? It's a different group of people up there by the Syrian Jordan region, right? It's not the same group of people here. On top of that, Daniel is a very different character. He's not a prophet. He's actually a judge, right? He is obviously not anybody who is following the God Yehovah, right? Rather, he is following a god called Rapu, who is considered to be a judge god in a deity, in a pantheon that I'm not actually entirely aware of. And you know, the other major portion of it, of course, being that he's not Hebrew at all. He is a Ugarit, right? So, like, why would you be counting this person in your particular text with people like Noah, for example, who is considered to be at least in the lineage of Hebrews? Also, it's 800 years in the past. Like, why is Ezekiel just referencing this random dude from 800 years in the past that nobody in the Bible ever references ever again? It just doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't. He's not consistent with anyone that he would have conferred righteousness on, or it's a stretch by any means, that type of position. But you know, the thing is, we have Ezekiel, who was a contemporary of the period. He was situated in Babylon. He was in exile as well. You know, Josephus speaks of, you know, the family line that Daniel had come from. The Babylonians were trying to take some of the best and bring them to the courts. So, you know, everything fits. I know we didn't get to talk a lot about, you know, going from Hebrew to Aramaic, back to Hebrew, which would seem consistent with Hebrew exile, you know, coming on scene. That's his language, Hebrew. He gets brought into the court and he starts picking up, you know, another Semitic language that he's being educated in, and he's using that language. And then as soon as the Persians take over, what happens is he go back to Hebrew, because they're not speaking a Semitic language anymore. They're actually, you know, an Indo-European type language, which wouldn't have been as easy to pick up on. So I thought that was a good discussion. Obviously, you know, I did focus on several main points. First, that the Jewish canon was closed, which after 424, while they recognized a lot of records that came in into the period, none of those got into their canon. You know, and, you know, this was the thing. This is what we can see from history. It didn't. You know, there was also a superstition among the Jews, and I've provided lots of sound quotations from inside and outside the Talmud. They all believed that the spirit was withdrawn with the last prophets of Malachi, Haggai, and Zechariah, that they had all gone. So it would have been beneath them to add something in that didn't have the spirit of prophecy upon it. So they wouldn't have brought in any work. And if they would have, it would have been a work on the Maccabees, which was added as Septuagint, but not the Jewish canon. We don't see, and Josephus makes that specific argument. They knew about these other records, but none of these records got into the Jewish canon. Some of them got into the Septuagint, but not the Orthodox Jewish canon. And we see that even with the point on Jerome. The fact of the matter is, you know, Jerome got the same testimony from the Jews. But I did think the Alexander example really threw him for a loop, in the standpoint of, now we have to address history because of the fact that, you know, that book was brought into public notice. And we do have to explain why. We have a report from Josephus that Cyrus the Great had read Isaiah, and not only were the Jews spared, but they were allowed to go back to the area and rebuild their temple. Mm-hmm. You know, and then we have another case with Alexander the Great. He's in the area, and Jerusalem is spared. You know, they were a Persian ally. They were occupying the military high ground overlooking Alexander's supply lines going in and outside of Egypt. And he spared that city. And the only thing that explains it is he wouldn't have offended a God that predicted his victories. And I did a huge piece showing corroborating statements from Arian and the Roman historian Rufus. I also brought in Hectus of Abdecta, who did a history on the Jews and mentioned it was a contemporary of Alexander, that he mentioned that the Jews were in his that served as auxiliaries with King Alexander, which is right from Josephus's report that Alexander asked if anyone wanted to join his army, they can, and Josephus says many did. Egypt made him pharaoh, gave him all this money. What did the Jews have to give him to spare their city? I mean, they didn't make him king or high priest, but what they did show him was our God predicted him.
Which, of course, would play very well into Alexander's like massively egotistical feeling about himself, right?
Yes, it goes right into it, because what Arian tells us is, he was very interested in, heading off to the Temple of Ammon in Lebanon, because he believed he was descendant, from Zeus, that Perseus and Hercules went to the oracle there and, came away with information. And so Arian tells us just how eager what Alexander thought of himself, that he was a demigod. I mean, his men at Opus had accused him of adopting foreign gods, and for very good reason. So the Jews presenting a book with a God protected, he would not want to be on the opposite side. So it makes fully sense why he spared. He wouldn't have wanted to offend a God that had predicted him.
And I always, not always, sorry, I did also, is what I meant to say, find it interesting that, Jim Majors had the point. He said, what was predicted in Daniel that wasn't explicitly predicted elsewhere? And that was an interesting one to me, because most of the prophecies in Daniel aren't explicitly predicted elsewhere. The 70 weeks aren't anywhere else. The abomination of desolation isn't explicitly laid out anywhere else. The Syrian wars aren't predicted anywhere else. The rise of Greece isn't predicted anywhere else. The certain messianic prophecies aren't predicted anywhere else, even if the Messiah himself is predicted elsewhere. And I found that to be an interesting. I also thought the Greek influence argument was interesting. Because really what he means to say is not that the book is, appears to show any Hellenization in it, which is what he was arguing at first, but that the Greek the book appears to have potentially some Greek loan words, which of course can be easily explained by virtue of the fact that Greek was an existing language at that time. But I found those things to be incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that would be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, though. I mean, if Alexander,
that is, and think about the mindset of Alexander. Not only that he believed he was God, but this is the student of Aristotle. I mean, Philip brought Aristotle into the education program to teach Alexander and the others. So Alexander also had historians with him. So the presentation of the book would not be something first. Alexander had Athenians with him, Thebes, people that thought very little of the Macedonians. So he's obviously trying to press upon, cities that he conquered in Greece, just his divine nature. And, here's what I'm doing. So he wouldn't want to be laughed at behind the scenes that, oh, you believed in the Jewish book. So he had historians. We know one of Aristotle's students speak about the Jews. So they had knowledge on who the Jews were. And so if you think about it, a book is being presented with a number of historians with him that he brought on him on his campaign. So he's not going to just be fooled or they're bringing out a forged work to him. and the fact that he was of the worldview that he believed in gods, he believed he was of divine essence. You can see why he come. What's going on, Jim?
Hey, what's up? Sorry,
what
I came
happened?
here first, but it was just waiting, and I was like, well, I'll pop in the other one real quick, and they bombarded me, so.
You know what?
Hey, Jim.
Actually,
Good to see you.
I knew somebody had come in here because I heard someone pop in, and I thought, nah, yeah, that's probably not. And then I went over and looked, and nobody was here, so I figured I was just hearing stuff. And then it bothered me, so I actually asked John about it. He said he didn't know, and so I guess I figured it was you.
Yeah, because I thought I was like, where is Jim? Because I saw the other channel, and it was weird. So I was like, well, let me just.
Yeah, and I told Jonathan that I was coming too. So I mean. Yeah, but, I mean, I was in here for like 5 minutes, I promise, and then I was like, I was just like staring at a dachshund, I think.
And you
I just have to say I'm envious of your mustache. I'm working on mine right now. So
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, it looks like you got it going on. Just don't cut it.
Yeah, no, yeah, Jim's. Oh, Jim. On a separate note, did you end up getting the thing?
What thing?
The email with the video.
Yes, but I haven't watched it yet.
Okay.
I got the email alert, but I was just in the minutes right before the debate. I mean, no, I haven't watched it yet. Actually, you know what? Let me watch it real quick, and I'll give you a live reaction.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just popped in over at Amy's real quick. She's actually got like a lot of it's only 28, but considering 396 subscribers, that's actually really good for her. That's solid.
At one point there were 40. I was like, oh, okay.
Wow, that's nice. That's actually really nice. That's impressive. Anyways, sorry, I just popped in there to check in real quick and noticed that. So what's up? I mean, how did you end up liking the performances? Obviously, yours is one of them, but. What did you feel about the debate?
I loved it. I think it was a really great discussion. It was probably my favorite debate I've done to date. But then again, it was Dr. Josh, and it was the Book of Daniel. So it's just two of my favorite things. You know?
Yeah, that's what your doctoral dissertation is on, right?
Yep.
Word. That's definitely what's up. Yeah, I thought it was actually a really good debate as well. I think it's one of the better ones that I've seen on MDD for at least quite some time, if not, just because there have been some pretty good ones in the past, but definitely in the top in general for sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen any what I would say good ones, and probably like definitely not in the last few years. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been and there's been a couple I thought that were good. It's usually what it is I first off, I don't like the flat Earth topic anymore. I used to really like the flat Earth topic, honestly, because I thought it was just one of those things where I don't know why everybody has like the conspiracy theory that they find really interesting, and mine was flat Earth. I guess it was probably to figure out why people believed there was a flat Earth, right? It seems like such an obvious thing to me. But like after watching the 1000th debate on it, it's like I don't care anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
But no, I thought it was really good. So
do you mind? So Jonathan made me an intro for my channel. Do you mind if I share it with you guys and kind of so it's my first time seeing it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool, because he's been working on this for 2 years, guys.
I felt so bad because I had promised.
Don't man. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I just
no. But you know what I was happy about is that I was able to keep my promise and get it done before our debate. So I was happy about. That's why I asked you about the email earlier. I was like, let me surprise him, so it'll be good. But yeah, go ahead and share it. It'll be fun.
Okay, let's see.
By the way, real quickly, while we're doing that, I just want to remind everybody, obviously, please do like, please do share if you like this sort of content, all that kind of stuff. Consider subscribing if you dig this channel and the kind of stuff that we post on here. And link is in the description, but somebody in the room has to know who you are. I do have that rule to avoid porno bombing. So sorry if that renders you not able to join the room, but that's the way it's got to be.
All right, so let's see this, Jim.
I'm trying to, but I don't know what the dealio is here. Okay, hang on. That's a weird format. Okay, I think we got it here.
Is it allowing you to download it, or?
No, here it is. So you find the share audio. Okay. All right, here it is. Can you guys see it?
Yeah, there.
Yes.
Okay. Damn. Dude, that is badass.
No, I'm glad you like it, dude. Yeah, no, I'm happy I got it to you for the debate. It's probably 2 years and X amount of days over, but I'm glad I got that for you, Jim, and made you look like a stud in that video.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool.
Yep.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
Sorry, I actually was just I was just saying, Kevin, it looked like you were trying to jump in. Is that right?
Yeah, my mic's kind of on delay. I was saying that was very, very sexy.
So what did everybody think about the debate? I think I missed that part of the conversation.
I don't know if we talked so much. I mean, there was some covered. I thought it was good. I did think Dr. Josh was a little quiet. I was big.
That's my fault, though. That really is my fault, because he I don't know. He thinks that I'm somehow more qualified to speak on it than he is. When even though it's my what I specialize in, he's probably read more on it than I have. You know.
Yeah, no, I thought it was good. I wanted to give a chance to Dr. Boyce to come in and speak, and
yeah, I really enjoyed his input.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun discussion. I thought it was. I'm sorry, I'm just like half asleep. It's been a very, very long day, but no, I thought if anyone to do with it, I was glad it was you, Jim. I think we were able to open up perspectives. Steve and I, we come from probably different views on how we approach subjects. I did honestly think, in the preparation, that there was going to be a lot of linguistic arguments. I felt like we didn't talk enough about probably, the composition of Daniel, in the sense going from Hebrew to Aramaic back to Hebrew. I had thought that, okay, there, and so come rebuttal, I'm like, I was anticipating some linguistic arguments, which really didn't come up.
I mean, yeah, I don't think that when it comes to like determining if it's prophecy or forgery, or even if it's written in the 2nd century or 6th century, I don't think that that linguistics really has a whole lot to do with it, because I think that at best that linguistics, the argument is essentially that written anywhere between the 6th century and 2nd century. You know?
Yeah, I thought because Dr. Josh had spent a lot of time on the linguistics and some of his videos, that's where maybe he would be coming from. But
there are some linguistic arguments for both sides, or arguments that are used for both sides. Like, for example, one that's used for both sides is like the Greek instruments and the mention of symphonia, which is also mentioned in another contemporary Greek text. That's an argument that's used for both sides, which we kind of saw in the debate. But like the Aramaic, for example, like there's no consensus on it, but most people say that the Aramaic is somewhere between the late Persian and early Hellenistic period, and that the Hebrew the Hebrew kind of leans more towards a 2nd century dating than the 6th century, whereas the Aramaic, we can date it with the Aramaic to the 6th century without a whole lot of difficulty. But once you put in the Hebrew, then that kind of throws a wrench into those gears, so to speak.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good
but
conversation.
not strong enough to where you can use the linguistics as an argument, on its own. Like it can't stand as an argument on its own, and I don't even consider it to be strong enough to use it to bolster any other argument. But that's just me.
Yeah, no, I've heard others argue it solely or primarily on linguistic grounds. So,
right, like Kitchens or.
Yeah. So, and even with some of the Christian apologetics, they'll go to some of they'll spend a lot of time on the Elephantine Papyri or even the Sumerian, and try to make the linguistic arguments that way.
But all it gets you is Imperial Aramaic, which you see Imperial Aramaic in the 2nd century still being used.
Yeah. So I was kind of surprised. Yeah, no, I was hoping Josh would talk more because I know he is real knowledgeable in this area. So
yeah, I was hoping he would too, but he kind of kept deferring to me. And me, like once I answer a question, I either answer it in like 3 words or 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, no, but I thought it was good. This is Dr. Boyce's first time on Modern Day Debate.
I think he did great. I think he had a really great demeanor, and I appreciated his candor and everything. I was hoping he would be in here, but
yeah, no.
Yeah, I've been trying to get Dr. Josh over on this channel for like a year. I don't know, like he doesn't seem to have any sort of a particular distaste for me. I just think for whatever reason, something's always coming up. But
no, I was referring to Dr. Boyce.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. No, Dr. Josh,
actually the first time I heard Dr. Boyce.
His son gets up at 5 every morning, and it's like midnight, or it's 1 o'clock right now where he is. So it was like midnight whenever we finished. So I was like, man, just go to bed.
Yeah, no, I know, and he's on the East Coast, I think, too. So
yeah.
No, I thought it was a really good conversation, actually, too. I did think there were certain arguments that I thought were interesting for reasons of I don't know. So this may sound a little odd at first, but I think when I explain it, it won't sound as odd. I think a lot of the arguments for like historical inaccuracy in certain places, even though there's obviously different and entirely separate points to be made on either side from what I'm saying now. One of the things that always like chimes into my mind immediately, not just when we're talking about Daniel, but when we're talking about dating any text, is if the event in question has any sort of question about it, that's really kind of begging the question, in my opinion. So, like, for example, if you have let's say you have a text that is claims to be from 400 and it's describing something that happened in 405 BC, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You mean like a prophecy of 5 years in the future?
No, like something that happened 5 years ago. So on the BC.
Okay, gotcha.
So you got something 400 BC and it's claiming to record something that happened in 405 BC, right? Now, if you were making an argument that this thing was from 200 BC, you could make the argument it seemingly contradicts something that we think or something that we might even have from 400 BC. And you could jump to say it not that it contradicts the source, but that it contradicts the facts, right? But if this source indeed does actually come is from rather 400 BC, just like the other source that it contradicts, now it only contradicts a source. It doesn't contradict the facts. You know what I mean? In other words, saying it contradicts historical facts does seem to me to sort of beg the question by saying like this is removed from the facts and it contradicts something that should know better than it. You know what I mean?
I would say that might be an argument if there was only, say, like one other text, but like when you have hundreds of other texts from multiple sources, that are contrary to it, even ones like within the same canon, things like, who was the king of Babylon when it fell, and who did it fall to? There is no record of a Darius the Mede, and every text that we have regarding the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, they all point to Cyrus the Great of Persia, and that Nabonidus was the king as he had come back from his stay in Tama. So even if Belshazzar could be considered a king, which he wasn't in any Babylonian text, just considered a co-regent, that by the time that the Neo-Babylonian Empire fell, Nabonidus had already resumed the throne in Babylon. So thus, no reason for a co-regent. And every Babylonian text that mentions the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire talk about Nabonidus being taken prisoner. So, I mean, it's either Daniel's right and all these other texts are wrong, or all these other texts are right and Daniel is wrong.
Well, I think in some instances there would be, certainly some questions that would have to go like back and forth with somebody who might be even a little bit more knowledgeable than I would be myself, for sure. But I think in other instances too, it does seem to me like I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Like, for example, Belshazzar, right, that is an interesting one. Belshazzar, if I remember correctly, Belshazzar in Daniel does offer Daniel to be the third highest ranked in the kingdom, which would be pretty, interesting considering the fact that he wouldn't be the highest ranked in the kingdom himself. He couldn't give him number 2 because that's him, right?
Except that as co-regent, you weren't allowed to do certain things. Like, we can tell that Belshazzar didn't have the full capabilities of the king because they had to forego their New Year's celebration until 598. And
well,
that's sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
And that's because it required the presence of the king to be there. Like the king was a critical element of the New Year's party, and they weren't able to celebrate that until the time when Nabonidus came back from his 10-year stay doing archaeological research in Tama.
That doesn't rule out the possibility of just a simple corruption or abuse of power, if that was the case.
Well, but what do you mean by abuse of power? Because all the texts say that Nabonidus was king. If there was an abuse of power, some kind of a usurpal during the period that they were invaded, I mean, you would expect to see it expressed in some text, but yet we have in hundreds of cuneiform texts that talk about, they're like texts that are talking about, barley exchange or grain exchange or captives going here or there, or just general legal text and communications and so on and so forth. And they're internally dated and they mention that the king Nabonidus, the prince Belshazzar, even while Nabonidus is in Tama, all of the cuneiform documents that are dated during that 10-year period that he was there, that Belshazzar was co-regent, they still refer to Nabonidus as king and Belshazzar as prince. No text, no Babylonian text refers to Belshazzar as king.
I may have been misunderstanding a bit, but what I mean is that maybe that Belshazzar was going around maybe flaunting a level of authority that he didn't actually have. is what I was saying. That's the perspective of the people that were being subjugated.
So it would have to be a belief of not only the author, but of the audience as well. Because if the audience didn't believe it, they wouldn't accept the text.
Right.
Right. But we don't have any evidence that was the case, because that would be considered an attempted usurpal of the throne, attempting to overthrow the current rule, which happened all the time throughout the course of Babylon. But there is no mention of that. There are several other usurpals. Nebuchadnezzar had his throne usurped from him, and so did his son-in-law. It's something that happens, but it's something that's always mentioned in the text. But we have no mention of any attempt to overthrow the kingdom by Belshazzar. Nor do we have any mention of him as king, or even claiming to be king.
Okay.
Well, and to be fair, I will say to an extent that I have a small amount of just general ignorance about this particular period. I know more about Nebuchadnezzar than any of the other Babylonian kings, if I'm being honest. And even then, I've always been intensely interested in the Torah and Joshua era, so that's where I've always been strongest. But nonetheless,
so as far as Nebuchadnezzar goes, what year do you think that he invaded Jerusalem? Was it during
I think it's
Jehoiachin or Jehoiakim?
I think it's likely that he would have invaded 3 separate times. I think that based off of what it seems, what I seem to gather from the biblical text, which even despite, I have certain positions that I take that are, certainly based on my fundamentalism, absolutely. But even apart from some of those, things like the book of Ezekiel are some of the most primary texts that we have about Nebuchadnezzar. Right? Like we have actually pretty sparse accounts of his life, at least from his life, like from the time period of his life. And
if you look at 2 Kings and Jeremiah, they both show that in the first siege was during the reign of Jehoiachin. And that Jehoiachin was considered to be the legitimate king of Judah, not Jehoiakim. And that's in 2 Kings 25, 27 through 30, and Jeremiah 52, 31 through 34.
Right, and so, like I was saying, what it seems to me, if I take all the texts as being consistent and also as being correct.
You're roboting for me. I don't know if you are for anybody else.
Even if I don't, like I said, even if you don't take a fundamentalist position, I think you do have to some practice. Sounded any better for anybody?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So what I was saying is, if I take the texts at face value and take them as consistent with each other and as at least generally accurate, which I think to an extent, regardless of religious beliefs, we kind of have to in this particular matter, just because it seems to me that these are some of the best sources we actually have for Nebuchadnezzar are actually the Bible itself. Because we, like I said, we don't have a lot of contemporary sources for him. And so it seems to me like he likely attacked the city 3 times. One time, probably, I don't know when exactly. It's hard to pin down. I think it's probably safe to say that 605 is like the latest possible date. But it seems to be like whenever he was, there's a point where he returns home from a military campaign as a prince, right? And it seems on that military campaign, he did stop by Jerusalem and attack it. And that seemingly is where Daniel and a few others might come from.
No, he attacked it before, after he tried to do a certain push against the Egyptians, and it failed. And out of frustration, we went through Jerusalem. He took some of the the temple items and everything like that. But the reason I brought up Jeremiah 52 and 2 Kings is because they both mention the same, the exact same siege of Jerusalem by the king of Babylon in the same day that to the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah. So not while Jehoiakim is king, but while Jehoiachin is king. And it's not Nebuchadnezzar, but it's Awel Marduk. And it even dates it, to the date and the month, and it talks about how they treated him as a king, and so on and so forth. But there are no external, even within the Bible, outside of Daniel, there is no reference to an exile of Jewish people in Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar in 605 or 606. And in fact, it's impossible for him to have been there in 605 as king and sieging it, because sieging is something that takes a long time. It's not something that was just just really quickly done. But because it was under their rule, it was easy for them to just go in and just take anything that they wanted. They kind of owned the place. It would piss off the locals, but they could still do it. But in order for him to be king, his father first had to die, which didn't take place until after the Battle of Carchemish, which was in 605, at the end of 605.
Right. In that same campaign I'm referencing, though, and not to jump in too quickly. Sorry, I just wanted to point out, before we get too far away from it. Excuse me. You did actually already provide for where Daniel and his three friends as well. Their names are fleeting at the moment. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? For where they can actually be captured in what would to them be considered at least an exile, right? Because they're Jewish people, they should be in the Holy Land, and that's when he passes through the city on. I don't exactly remember as far as if it's on his way to Egypt or back from Egypt. But nonetheless, when he's a prince, right, in that military campaign, when he's a prince, he actually does attack Jerusalem at that point. At least is what it seems, right? We don't have record from the Babylonians saying he attacked Jerusalem, but it does seem like that's what the Israelites indicate, and we know he went through that area at that time. Right, in my opinion, that it allows for us to have the capture of at least some citizens. It's clearly not all the citizens, right? It's not like a huge exile or anything.
But you would expect it in other texts. You expect it for one in Jeremiah, and two, I would say Ezekiel, for sure, those two texts. And when Daniel 1 is talking about about Nebuchadnezzar, it's not just a coming in and taking of goods from the temple. It specifically says that he besieged it, that he took Israelites from the royal families, and that he and it says that part of these, was the Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. So I mean, but it dates it to the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. And it says that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. But there was no siege of Babylon during the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. There is no single reference of anything, not even of him coming through the temple, not even in any other Hebrew text. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't king during the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. He hadn't even fought the Battle of Carchemish yet at this point. Not until later that year.
The same year, or well, it depends on how exactly the Judahites would be counting it. I don't know if they count by.
It was later that year. It was late in the year.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I mean, though. You know what I mean? It's like that there is we know almost indisputably, right, that Nebuchadnezzar is in that region at this time, right? Like that's something that we both accept as a fact.
Forget about Nebuchadnezzar. Just forget about Nebuchadnezzar. Why doesn't Daniel know who the king of Judah was when he went into exile?
Well, I think the king, when Daniel went into exile, excuse me, I think it was Jehoiakim, because if Nebuchadnezzar is in that region and attacks Jerusalem, right, and he takes any prisoners, then that would be the king would be Jehoiakim at the time that Daniel himself was taken prisoner, right? And just for the record, we do have even a more explicit example of Nebuchadnezzar doing exactly this to exactly Jerusalem in 597, right?
Right,
and
well,
I'm not saying these two are the same thing. What I'm saying is it does allow us a pattern, right, where he's going to areas, and he does this to Tyre also. He goes
Yes.
to an area. When he defeats them, he takes some educated folk and some royalty and stuff like that, and then he leaves, right?
The one in 597 is the same one that's in 2 Kings 24:15. It happens in 597, but Jehoiachin is the king, and he had been king for over a year at this point. No, for not even a year at this point. Sorry.
Yeah, his full reign is like 3 months.
Yeah, he ruled from late 598 to March of 597. And so we do have evidence of a siege, but we don't have evidence of any siege during the reign of, or during the reign of Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin's father. We don't have one of 607, 606, 605, however you want to number it. The first capture by Nebuchadnezzar that we see in all of them is this 598, 597 one that you mentioned, and was during the reign of Jehoiachin. And there are hundreds of cuneiform documents from the Babylonians that talk about Jehoiachin being the king. And we have one specifically that's internally dated to 592. And so it's what, 5 6 years after the siege, and Jehoiachin is continued to be regarded as the legitimate king of Judah.
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily not the case that in other words, let me rephrase that. That was a terrible way to word it. I don't think there's any sort of a problem with him being still the legitimate king of Judah if if Nebuchadnezzar, in other words, is not interested in necessarily deposing him at that time. So in other words, if Nebuchadnezzar is coming here with the interest of potentially subduing somebody who is seemingly a little rambunctious rather, or just maybe making like a statement of power, which is something that frequently happens at those times, or even just kind of kicking the cat because he's disappointed because the Battle of Carchemish doesn't really go his way, and also his father just died. There's a numerous different reasons why he could want to potentially attack the city without actually deposing the king. And in fact, it would even make sense why you would have somebody like Daniel being, given to Nebuchadnezzar, and also have Jehoiakim being, retained as king.
All makes sense, but what doesn't make sense is not being recorded in any Babylonian text or any other Jewish text but Daniel.
Well, we don't know that it's not recorded in any Babylonian text. We just know that it's not recorded in any one that we have, right? We have a very sparse record of Babylonian.
We have hundreds that are to the contrary. We have hundreds that talk about both sieges that we know of. The two sieges that are externally verified by other sources besides just the Babylonian cuneiform text, by Jeremiah and 2 Kings. And all of them unanimously agree that there are two, and none of them believe that the first one was in 605. They all agree on the dates of these, and consistency like that is almost unheard of. So to me, the most likely explanation is that Daniel, the author of Daniel, knows that the period of exile isn't 70 years. And so he extends it to 605, to as early as he can for Nebuchadnezzar, and or that he thinks that he can, apparently, because that's as close to 70 as you get. I think it comes out to be like 68.
See, it does seem to me though that even then he has a pretty astute knowledge of history if he made this up, right? Because it does just so happen that in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's reign, Nebuchadnezzar is in that region, which that he shouldn't know if he's living in 160 BC, right?
I mean, to learn people in the 2nd century, they would have been familiar with Persian history, Babylonian history, Jewish history. That, I mean, these are things that they would have recognized, like these historical events in Daniel 8 and 10, 11 and 12, things that they would be, familiar with for sure.
I don't know. I personally just have a hard time believing that, especially considering the fact that we don't have a lot of these, texts that do exist from that time, unless they're written explicitly by like historians, like Josephus. But like, for example, Judith, right? Judith is filled to the brim with historical inaccuracy. It's a historical travesty. You know what I mean?
We do, though. We have 1st and 2nd Maccabees from the 2nd century, and we have from the 6th century, we have Babylonian cuneiform texts, hundreds of them.
Right, but 1st and 2nd Maccabees are recording history that, first off, I would argue they're history books, but also they're recording history that's like just not 50 years removed from them, right? Like it's right behind them.
They're mentioning Judas Maccabeus gathering up the holy book, which was 167.
Right, but I mean, when was 1st Maccabees written? It was written in about the year 100, right? BC.
Thereabouts.
100 BC.
Yep.
Right, so that's kind of right. That's not a separation of 400 years.
But that's what most people believe. Yeah,
for sure. But you see what I mean? Then though, like that's kind of that's immediate history for them. That's not remembering things that happened 400 or 500 years ago.
Right, but Daniel seems to be, right, because whereas 1st and 2nd Maccabees get a lot of these historical events correct, and they're not off on anything. They seem to be something written shortly before the time or that took place shortly before the time of authorship, and yet Daniel doesn't know not just one or two things, but nearly every single major event that he's recording, he is either wrong about, or every other text that is contemporary to the 6th century, such as Babylonian text, or even later Hebrew text outside of Daniel, you have to see that all of those are incorrect, and Daniel is the only one that is right, because it's not just in one place, but in multiple places that Daniel's incorrect.
Well, so there's a couple things I think I'd want to kind
of. Sure. I just real quick.
Out there,
I can't stay long.
First off, that does seem a little bit contradictory in my view, in that, like, in one end, it's
in one end what?
And it does seem to be on. Sorry, I was just saying. I was just gonna say real quick. It does seem on one end, we want Daniel to be historically ignorant, but on another end, we want him to be historically astute enough to actually choose a place where Nebuchadnezzar is in the right time and at the in the right place, and at the right time.
What do you mean by that? By we want him to be? What do you mean?
No, well, so not want literally. I'm just saying, like, so it seems like you're presenting a case where Daniel is not, I wouldn't say historically ignorant, but certainly very historically flawed. But then on the other end, it seems like to explain a way where Daniel is actually seemingly very historically astute. Like, for example, the 3rd year of Jehoiakim being a time when Nebuchadnezzar's in the area. Then we explain it by it being something that he should actually have knowledge of, and that he would be a wise and educated Jew. And it seems like those to me are contradictory.
But the thing is, but Nebuchadnezzar wasn't in the area at that time. Is the thing?
But he was, right, because he has to in order to go fight the Egyptians, right? The Battle of Carchemish.
No, that took place north of Jerusalem.
I think. Well, if I'm not mistaken,
he met the Egyptians, right? But he only fought he only took things from Jerusalem on the return trip, right?
Right, and so that's kind of what I'm saying. And by the way, I did want to note too, 2 Kings 24 doesn't explicitly say that he was attacked by that Jehoiakim was attacked, but it does say that Jehoiakim in his 3rd year had bands of Chaldees as well as Syrians, Moabites, and Ammonites against him. And Chaldees would be Babylonians. It doesn't specifically name Nebuchadnezzar.
Is his captivity of Jehoiachin? Well, no, it doesn't say Nebuchadnezzar. It says Marduk, who was the successor, who would have been the king at the time of the 37th year of exile of Jehoiachin. It says Jehoiachin, king of Judah, right? Not Jehoiakim.
I know. It's Jehoiakim in 224. It's Jehoiakim. At least in the King James. I guess it could be different in another version potentially. But it's Jehoiakim in the King James for 224, and it says that and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, and the Lord. Let's see. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees and bands of the Syrians and bands of the Moabites and bands of the children of Ammon. And actually, it does mention Nebuchadnezzar. It says in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up. So I was actually wrong about that.
And in Jeremiah 52, it says in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah. Right. So so Jehoiachin is still being recognized as the king of Judah, even 37 years into his exile. Jeremiah 52:31.
Yeah, well, I don't think that it's necessarily contradictory, though, right? Like I think it.
Well, why would Jehoiachin be called king of Judah if Jehoiakim?
No, and that's. Sorry, I'm sort of eating my words a little bit. I don't think that those things are necessarily like. Well, because I think they're two separate events, right? That's what I'm saying. I think that what you have in being described in the book of Daniel and also seemingly in the book of Second Kings is what it seems to me to be first attack that doesn't result in opposing it can potentially level check included in then he would return for the record around 590 on 587 for the destruction progressively worse each time. In the first one, it seems like Kim is allowed to retain his monarchy and Judah is still and third time, of course, they just ransack the city and take all the population, right? Almost like he's getting
why isn't there
progressively fed up with these Jews.
But why is there no mention of that happening in any other text? Even if that's all it was, why isn't there?
Well, there is though, right? Like there is at least one other mention, right? It is another Jewish text, but 2 Kings 24 does indicate that Jehoiakim is attacked by Nebuchadnezzar in his third year. Now that could potentially be either something that, maybe even that's, I guess if I were a critical man, I could argue potentially that's even the source Daniel got it, maybe, right? But it does seemingly indicate in 2 Kings 24 that in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and also in the reign of Jehoiakim, specifically Jehoiakim's third year, that he is attacked by Nebuchadnezzar because he decides to rebel.
Sorry, I just took the cover off my monitor. I'm gonna look up something with my headache. I can't look at screen, man. It's killing me.
Oh, you're totally all right.
Okay, but in 2 Kings 25, 27 through 30.
Let me pull that up. 25, 27 through 30. See. So 2 Kings 25, 27 through 30. So it says, and in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this. I'm going to go with Evil Moradok, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison, and he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats. I know how to read, I promise. Of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king according to his daily needs as he lived.
Right. So there were other kings from other territories that Babylon had conquered. But Jehoiachin, when he was released, he was given a seat of honor higher than any other king. But there's no mention really in all of Second Kings when we're talking about post-exile. Jehoiakim is not considered a king. He's not even mentioned. It's just Jehoiachin. And same thing in Jeremiah or in Ezekiel. Like nowhere can you come to the conclusion, except for Daniel, that Nebuchadnezzar besieged the town of Jerusalem during the reign of Jehoiakim, or that Jehoiakim was king, or that he was considered a king at the time, anywhere but the book of Daniel.
Well, again, though, I think you got to cross-check that with 2 Kings 24 as well, and especially considering 2 Kings 25. Now we're talking should be either the self-same author or self-same group of authors, depending on which of our two theories someone would take, right? But regardless of which it is, the same general group, right? We're writing both 24 and 25.
Jehoiakim's reign, though, is from 609 to 598.
Yeah, and then in 24 it says, in his days Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years, right? 3 years into the reign of Jehoiakim would be it would be, I think it's probably 606, but 605 would be close enough, I guess. So whichever it ends up being, I don't.
Right, but this isn't a besieging, right? This is the basically was the kidnapping of a king, and then he eventually agreed to be his servants, so to speak, but be a I guess what the Romans would call an autonomous ruler. But 3 years into his autonomous rule, he rebelled and didn't do what he was supposed to, and so then they came to destroy, which is what that term besiege means. Like the invasion in 24 and the besieging in 25, they aren't the same thing. And there was no exile during Jehoiakim's reign.
Well, I think that depends kind of on whose perspective you're talking about, right? Because if you're talking about from the perspective of the nation of Israel, that's definitely true, right? The nation of Israel does get to remain in this region here, and Nebuchadnezzar, when he is seemingly attacking Jerusalem at this time, he doesn't remove their sovereignty per se. Well, sovereignty, quote unquote, right? Because sovereignty,
right? That's evidence. And Jehoiachin in verse 8 of chapter 24 shows that that he even became king. So it shows that that there was still this Jewish secession, and that he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And then it says, at that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it. Right. So that's the 597, 598. And it says Jehoiachin, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and his officials all surrendered to him. Says that he took Jehoiachin prisoner, and this is after the reign of Jehoiakim. So Jehoiachin can't be a king at this time. It has to be Jehoiachin.
Right, and that's kind of what I'm saying. I think that those are two. I think Daniel 1 and 1 Kings 24 are referencing one situation, and that this 598, 597 is a separate altercation, right? A separate battle. And I think
Second Kings mentions both of them.
Say again.
2 Kings mentions both of them.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly part of my point, right? Because if Second Kings, which is the self-same book, right, is mentioning both of these altercations, one in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, and then one in that actually ends up deposing Jehoiachin, right? Then that seems to me to be a pretty solid indication that both happened, especially since Second Kings, I don't know if we would agree 100% on its date. I'm not sure if fundamentalists and secular scholars take the exact same position, but pretty close, like within a century of each other.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not saying, and other people who are writing about the sieges of Jerusalem by Babylon aren't saying that that they were only invaded 2 times. I mean, an invasion and a besiegement are 2 different things, and Second Kings differentiates, between the invasion of the first one during the reign of Jehoiakim, and like you said, the one that deposed Jehoiachin from his throne was one during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon.
Right. And so what I'm kind of saying is I think that if I'm taking both texts as being consistent, right, with each other, which, to be fair, they don't necessarily have to be, right? But
they don't have to be unless you hold that view.
Say that one more time.
They don't have to be unless you hold the view that they have to be.
Right, exactly. And I fully grant that, right? But if I am taking them as being consistent with each other, right, it seems to me Daniel 1 and 2 Kings 24 are referencing the same situation, and that situation would be, and it even seems to me like it sort of explains itself in that Jehoiakim is probably remaining on the throne because he's willing to give over some level of tribute, almost like he's changed his mind, like he doesn't want to be a rebel anymore. And if you look in Daniel 1, right, it actually only says that they're bringing the vessels and treasure unto Babylon, right? As far as the king himself, right, it never actually makes reference to him being taken into Babylon. It does say that they want to take some of his well-favored and skillful.
Right, because it's an invasion, not a besiegement.
Right, exactly. But remember, in this situation, right, we are still talking about a situation where you'd have certain people like Daniel and his 3 friends, right, who would still be taken and brought into Babylon at that point, right? Which for them, that would be considered an exile. The nation of Israel might not consider themselves to be in exile, but it would make a lot of sense for Daniel and his friends to think that they were in some kind of an exile.
But even in 2 Kings and in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah, even though they talk about this initial invasion, they all only mention 2 besiegements. But Daniel's talking about a besiegement and an exile that's happening by Nebuchadnezzar in 605 or 606, and also none of these other texts mention a surrendering of people like the artisans or the temple people or the officials and their children or whatever until the reign of Jehoiachin. And that's when Jehoiachin, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and all his officials were surrendered. And then 2 Kings 24, my apologies, goes on to say that in the 8th year of the reign of Babylon, he took Jehoiachin prisoner, and that he removed the treasures from the temple of the Lord, he cut up all the gold articles, and that he carried all Jerusalem into exile at this point. So all the officers, the fighting men, pretty much everybody except for the poor and unskilled people. But it doesn't mention any deportation of anybody in this first invasion. None of them do.
Well, because I don't think it would be necessarily accurate to call it a deportation, and I think that might be part of where the hangup is, in my personal opinion, right? So, because we can deduce,
but that's what Daniel's claiming, though.
Well, not exactly, right? So let me kind of explain, because I see what you mean in that we can refer to it as a deportation from his point of view, right? Meaning that he, as a teenager, is being taken from his home, his holy land, and brought into Jerusalem, right? So we can see why, like I said, why him and his friends
in Babylon into exile.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, not into Jerusalem. But
not just him. Daniel says that it was the people of the royal family and nobility, all the young men that were good looking, that were smart, that could, in order for them to be able to serve in the Babylonian palace. And so these were, I mean, yeah, and it talks about Daniel and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego being four among them, and that they were of the upper echelon of the Jewish society. But it wasn't just just the king or just a couple of people or anything like that. There's no mention of the nobility and the royal family being brought into exile, like I said in 2 Kings and Jeremiah, until the reign of Jehoiakim, or I'm sorry, the end of the reign of Jehoiachin.
right, so that's what I'm saying. So there's a couple things that I think. So you have to kind of first lay down, obviously, what we do know, right? So we know that we have 2 Kings 24 and Daniel 1 seemingly referencing the same event. And we can seemingly take 2 Kings 24 as one that we both accept as fairly accurate. Is that fair to say before we move on?
As like historically speaking, I mean,
yeah.
for the purpose of the discussion, yeah.
Okay. So Daniel 1 potentially referencing the same event as 2 Kings 24, 2 Kings 24 being the one that would be deferred to.
Okay, where are you lining that up at though? Like which verse in Daniel do you think is cross-referenced in 2 Kings?
So in Daniel, it's Daniel 1 says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim is when Nebuchadnezzar came, and 2 Kings 24 says, and Jehoiakim became his servant, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar, 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him.
Okay, all right. Never mind, go ahead.
Well, and to be fair, one outside source does lead me to link these two together, in that not only is it the mention of Jehoiakim under reigning here 3 years, and then Nebuchadnezzar coming at him, but then also there is the fact that we have Nebuchadnezzar in the area of the Canaan and the Levant in the year 605, which would be roughly the third year of Jehoiakim. So it seems there's 3 cross references there, to the self-same event, which would be a attack of some kind on Jerusalem, right? So, and if that can be accepted as an established fact of history, or at least as a likely fact of history, we can assume something had to happen to get Nebuchadnezzar to leave, because Judah didn't defeat him. That definitely didn't happen.
Right. But it can't be, because we can't put him as king at 605, and we can't put a siege of Jerusalem in 605. And all the evidence that we have for the sieges of Jerusalem all point to at the closest to that time that's documented is the start of the siege in December of 589. But all the texts say that it wasn't conquered until 587 BCE. And there's no mention of one in 605, whether attempted or not. It's just completely silent in written history, except for the book of Daniel.
Well, Daniel, and again, 2 Kings 24, right? We got to remember that the Jews do at least count this twice. But Babylonians.
It's not a siege. It's not a siege, though.
But that's what the thing is, though, is if he's attacking Jerusalem, right? And Jerusalem is.
It's not an attack, though.
Well, so the how exactly it happened, right? I think is something that might be a little bit nitpicky for the sake of the conversation, right? The only reason I say that is simply because it, and I'll even take off my fundamentalist cap for a moment, right? And just think of it as if I were even a non-believer. But if I'm taking it just as historically accurate, right, or at least as reasonably historically reliable, which I think is a safe way to look at all historical text, right? In the sense that it's like, we're not going to take it all whole hog, but we're not necessarily claiming this is lying to us, right? Then it does seem that we have 3 separate sources that indicate Jerusalem is attacked around the year 605. And what I'm saying is that there has to be something that we don't necessarily have recorded outside of the Bible, that causes Nebuchadnezzar to be content with leaving at that point in time, right? And I think it's likely that the thing that causes him to be content with leaving is that Jehoiakim gives in and says, hey, you can take some of these people with you too, right, as some tribute. Like maybe it's like when he destroys Tyre, right, he took 126. The 126 isn't actually that much people, right?
But I don't think that your understanding is that when Cyrus let them go from being under Babylonian exile and let them return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, they were still all of Judah was still under Babylonian rule, and they were still under Babylonian rule at the time that Nebuchadnezzar invades. So it's not like, Jerusalem's free and everything like that, and Nebuchadnezzar is just invading to take us over. Nebuchadnezzar already owns them. So in that context, an invasion versus a besiegement are two very different things. The besiegement occurred and people were brought into exile because they not only rebelled against him, but wouldn't allow him through the walls and fought against him, which the initial rebellion is what led up to that. But he was still in charge.
Right. So if I may, just to offer an olive branch, and I'm not saying I believe this, but let's just assume for argument's sake that the style of fighting Daniel got wrong, right? It wasn't a siege. Let's just kind of just shelve that for a moment, just to see if I can kind of
and no exile.
Well, so hang on just a second, right? Because I don't think that part is necessarily true, right? So let's just take the siege part for a moment, and let's just say for a moment that I concede that. And like I said, I know that I don't literally concede that, but just for the sake of argument, right? What Nebuchadnezzar we still have the same problem, right? He has to be content with his victory when he attacks Jerusalem. He's not just gonna, because they didn't defeat him, that's for sure, right? And they didn't have some political gain to use against him. So what did they do that in this 605 time that we seemingly have 2 Kings 24, Daniel 1 referencing back to, even if Daniel 1 is in the 200s, it's at least referencing back to this moment the 2 Kings 24 references. And Babylonian records telling us he's in this region at this time, right? So what is it that they did to be safe, basically, to not incur the wrath of Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because he needs something to be satisfied, right?
But no Babylonian record puts him there in 605 or 606. In the Babylonian records, he's not even able to be king until after late 605, when his father dies, and he returns to Babylon to take the throne after his father dies, and it's even dated. I mean, it's impossible for him to.
Notice he just returns to Babylon, though, right? Returns to Babylon from campaigns in the Levant, right? That's where he is.
From campaigns in Hattieland, which was the already conquered lands, which at this time well, I don't know if they would have considered themselves as part of it or not. I don't really recall how early the what do you call it, the shutting down of the city, the closing of the walls began. But the besiegement of Jerusalem, the people being taken into exile, like even if Daniel got the words wrong, he still mentions the exile of nobility and royals. And yet everything that we see, there was no exile of nobility and royals until the reign of Jehoiachin.
But don't you see why that seemingly presents a problem, right? Like if there's nothing that Nebuchadnezzar is, because the Jews seem convinced that this event happened in the third year of Jehoiakim, right? They have two different sources, and we do know he's in that area at that time. In 605, he's in that. It's sure he's in the Hittite regions as far as Carchemish is concerned, the battle there, right? But where is that exactly? It'd be probably in modern Turkey, but just right above Lebanon, right? It's like he's so there. does still remain a problem. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that this is like a full blown exile as far as taking like, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, or I'm sure they didn't even have that much, but thousands of people, right? What I'm saying though is Nebuchadnezzar at this point, if he attacks Jerusalem at any point in the year 606 or 605, which would be as a prince, don't get me wrong, it would be when he was a prince for sure. We agree on that. If that occurred, he has to be satiated somehow. He's not just leaving. And I think it makes perfect sense considering that we know it happens in the future when he becomes king, right? It happens at Tyre, and it even happens in a much more severe way to Jerusalem itself in 597. It makes sense to me for the thing that satiates him to be Jehoiakim giving him tribute of very wise and, you know, unblemished, as Daniel 1 says, wise in the sciences, so on, children, and some, you know, some golden vessels and stuff like that, right? Like, because he's got to be, because we have this problem now, right? Nebuchadnezzar in this, you know, scenario where this isn't actually what occurs. He seemingly has this attack on an attack on Jerusalem where he's just satiated by nothing. He just leaves, almost like he's a raiding party of Huns, right? Which is not what the Babylonians seemingly do. Mm-hmm. Or the Jews are just wrong. 2 Kings 24 and Daniel 1 are both incorrect, and they're recording an event that didn't happen.
Okay, so even if it, okay, let's say that you're correct, and I'll grant you all of that. You still have to explain why Daniel refers to him as king of Babylon, even if, you know, during 606 that you know, after the Battle of Carchemish, then he attacked Judah, and for some reason the temple goods weren't good enough, and so he brought people into exile. And nobody mentions it but Daniel. I can grant you all of that, but then you have to additionally answer, why does he call him king of Babylon? And then you have to take that into context of all the other historical inaccuracies, of which most Daniel is the sole the sole textual reference for that person during that period, and more often than not stands against all of the other contemporary references to the same event. You know what I mean? So it's like, even if we solve one event, there's still 20 that are relevant that still are problematic. And when you take all those together as an accumulative case, pardon the stealing of the concept, but then the odds just heavily lean in the favor of a later dating.
Well, and you know, there is, I think, you know, things to be said on that for sure. I don't want to go too deep down that, just because I know you were trying to get out of here, so I don't want to sort of take too much time.
Yeah, I'm with you, you're saying.
But what I do kind of want to say in a brief response is just that I think that to at least in regards to Jerusalem question.
You were roboting on me for most of that.
Just because I
it's doing it again. I don't know if it's my internet connection or yours. It's storming here. But actually, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you want to address this, maybe we can get together later when our connections aren't so bad.
Solid 30, 45. It does sound like it's roboting pretty bad. Hey, I don't know. Ooh. This is. I don't know if you guys can hear me right now, but it appears that there's technical difficulties going on. Looks like Jim actually did head out. I did hear him say before he headed out that if we wanted to talk about this again, we could later when our connections weren't so bad. Which, Jim, if you are in the live chat, absolutely willing to do that. I think that'd be a super cool thing, actually, because this is a good conversation. And I tend to enjoy our conversations, actually. So, whatever that's worth. Nonetheless, though, hang on. All right, so everything's working there. Nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and, unless anybody wants to chime in, looks like everything is working now. If anybody wants to chime in, definitely jump in now. If not, we're going to go ahead and call this quits. We got Jonathan and Jim over here, so that was obviously very cool. And I appreciate all you guys being here. For the time being, I do just want to briefly say, please do like, please do share, please do consider subscribing if you actually enjoy the content we post here. And also, if you are interested in supporting me financially, I do aim on making this a career, not just podcasting and debating, but also writing and even, eventually doing lectures and stuff like that. Being a full-time academic, I think would be really cool. But nonetheless, if you guys are interested in contributing there, the Synagogue Patreon is where you'll be able to help with that, and I appreciate anything there. Also, while I'm waiting, and I'll throw the live chat, or in the live chat, the link one more time. Nobody feel pressured or anything, because we might just end up going down here soon, but just in case anybody else wants to chime in. Once again, Jim, if you are in the live chat, I appreciate you coming by, and I'll definitely take you up on talking about this some other time, because that'll be cool. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. Nonetheless, I'm going to probably be doing a video again tomorrow, about an hour-long video. I'm not sure which video I want to do. I was going to do a response video to The Raging Atheist, his 8 reasons not to follow the God of Abraham. But now I also want to do a refutation video of Smokey Saint's Young Earth creationist thing. We'll see whether or not I do one or the other. But I'm going to be back on here at some time tomorrow. And yeah, there's that. Figure I'd just let you guys know. Nonetheless, it looks like we're about ready to wind down. Doesn't look like anybody else is going to be coming in here. So we're going to get out of your guys' hair. Once again, want to remind you guys, please do like, share, and subscribe if you like this content. Hit that bell to get notified every single time we go live. And you can hit us up on any of the different social media platforms you partake in. I am on Parler, Gab, Twitter, Facebook, Minds, and etc. You can find me with the tag The Synagogue. And if you want to financially support what we are doing here and help me turn this into a career, you can find me at the Patreon, The Synagogue. Tag The Synagogue basically anywhere that you can find me. I'll be back to see you guys tomorrow, Lord willing, if the Lord tarries. And God bless you all. This was obviously a very cool conversation to have. Shalom. And yeah, we'll see you later.